What do you remember? What ideas you can't unsee? What do you remember from today? Concepts, ideas, tools, stories. What sticks in your head? Yes?
That they're courageous people. They're struggling with an issue that's very relevant today. They want to protect the dignity and worth of people.
I love the idea you used the word courage. I don't really think that we use that word enough in relationship to good journalism. It takes courage. It's not easy.
Integrity.
That's another good word, integrity. Good, good. Who else? Yes, in the back. Thank you.
Hello? Okay.
Hello.
Well, one of the themes that I thought was really reoccurring was the fact that not all stories are the same, and you can't approach them all the same, and the rules aren't always the same. Especially since we were specifically talking about trauma, the way that I would approach covering or talking to somebody would be with a lot more empathy and to really try to make sure that they're comfortable. Whereas when you're just doing everyday news stories, you don't usually take that approach. So I think that that's something I'll definitely keep with me.
It's a great point. You know, one of the things that good journalists bring to their work is context, right? I mean, we know, we've talked about that a couple of times in this last session too, that just seeing something sitting there, a picture, a quote, is often not very revealing at all until we put it in context. The tough videos that we talked about running or not running over the last couple of months, context gives you the ability to use many of them, and your reader or your viewer then understands what the story is about. When I talked about Vox this morning, I would propose to you that that model allows for a lot of context. The whole site is a bunch of context. And so what I like about your observation about the theme is that when we do our job, it's also we have to put the story we're working on in the proper context and approach it in a way that's appropriate to that story. It's great to say everything's got to be done quickly. Not everything can be done quickly. And if we can't do it right, I'll make a case for saying let's not do it, because we might do more damage than we could. We need the time to do certain stories differently than others. So that's a really good one. Thank you. Who else? Yes?
I love the idea of not putting it in a story frame, not making it the hero story frame or the racetrack or whatever, to make it its own story.
Okay, not putting stories in the frame, the archetype, telling the same story the same way all the time. You know, that can apply to theme, it can apply to structure, right? I mean, how many of you are tired of reading stories with anecdotal leads? Okay? There are some great stories out there with anecdotal leads, but if we start every one the same way, well, hey, you know, I might not get past the second paragraph. So, is that okay? Want to say it again?
No, that's okay.
Okay, good.
You said it.
Okay. Who else? Good ones. These are good. Yes?
I like that you talked about humanizing a story, because these aren't just stories of people who you're telling a story about. And I think that's really important, because what if you need to go back to this person? You need to build a relationship with them.
So much of what we do, when we do it well, is about relationships. You know, I like to say, you have a relationship with everybody in your life, even if you're not trying to. It may be you just pass them on the way to the bus stop every day, but that's a relationship. It's pretty shallow, it's not going to go far, but it's a relationship. And I think that, you know, that's such a good point to think about when we're talking about pursuing journalism. You know, are we going to, at the basis of every great relationship is trust, right? Look how hard Rachel worked to build trust with Joanna. Okay. Look how hard she worked to build that trust. And on top of that, a wonderful collaboration emerged. Okay? So I think that, again, relationship and context I see a link between them, because when we take the time to build context into our work, we are in a sense building a much healthier relationship with the audience about that story, I think. Another good point. Very good. What else? What else do you remember? Yes?
I think as someone who's entered some personal trauma in my life, it was important for me to go to this conference because it tells me how I don't have to ignore my background in my professional life. I don't have to like compartmentalize that. Learning in some ways that it can be useful for me was really valuable to me, and I really appreciate it.
Well, that's great. That's great. You know, I'm thinking, you know, when the last comment included the word humanizing. I bring to my work my baggage. Let's call it my biases. I'm biased. I'm proud of it, okay? It's part of me. Can't deny it. I'm not objective. In fact, I don't think any of you are. You all bring to your work some kinds of feelings. We all bring to our appreciation, our experience of the media we consume, some biases and experience, okay? And that's where the connections happen. The connection between a parent and that 3-year-old child on the beach is a different connection than my unmarried daughter would have at this point. She loves kids, but it's a different connection. And I think when we do our work, remember that every detail we put into the work, some of it being context, some of it being just good reporting, every one of those details has the potential to make the story connect with the people who are consuming it. That's what humanizes. It's building on those relationships. So the best writers I know are those who report detail really well and then choose well which ones they're going to put in the story. They don't use everything. They make really good choices. And in doing so, they allow a reader to make connections and appreciate the work. So, good one. Another one. Way in the back.
I enjoyed learning that sometimes telling the story can not just be a service to the audience, but it can also be a service to the person who's lived through the trauma. And that's not something that I really thought. You know, I always thought, not that they were exploiting them, but you know, I always felt sympathy toward the people in those stories and thought, oh, did it hurt them to be in the story? So it was really nice to see from them and the journalists that that's actually something that helped them, and that it can be healing and helpful for the victim as well as help.
It's sort of a risk, isn't it? I mean, when you get involved in a story with a reporter, you're never sure. Joanna wasn't sure, but over time, she began to believe that it was good. She did what Jenny's urging us to do with our journalism, is weigh the potential positives against the potential negatives and see whether one wins out. In Joanna's mind, it did. That's an interesting one, too. Good, good. It's also good for the subject. Any others? Come on. It's a long day. What else you got? Yes?
One of the things that resonated with me was just that, you know, as a journalist, sometimes finding out bad news, you want to report it from your audience just to try to give them time, but it's actually really important to realize that that news is going to get out anyway, and the longer you keep that in, the more trust you're going to lose with your audience.
So, coming to this realization that you don't control it.
Yes.
It's going to get out. It's there. It might already be out. You just haven't seen it yet. That's a big change for a lot of people in journalism. What else? Yes?
I saw a theme today in media literacy. We called it Journalism 101 a couple of times, but just the role of journalists and PR people to educate people.
Yeah, I mean, it keeps coming up that, you know, so I started out this morning talking about this disconnect between what the audience thinks our role should be maybe and what we think it should be. But part of that stems from a lack of understanding about what each is up to. And literacy could help at least explain what we're doing. Now, you know, I think that some promoters of media literacy think that if the audience understands better what we're doing, why we do it, that it will actually increase sales and, you know, they'll like us more. I don't know about that. But I do think if we want to have that kind of honest relationship with our audience, it behooves us to let them know how we gather news, how they're affected by that, what they can expect from us. One of the problems is, of course, there's thousands of newsrooms across the country engaging in this activity, and it's really hard. We don't want to standardize. We would love everybody to do great work, obviously, but I think it's hard to build the kind of campaign, if you will, that would say, here's what journalists do. Well, what some journalists do. Any others? Yes?
Something that will stick in my mind is the shock that I felt when I found out that somebody didn't think their Twitter feed was public. I thought that was the whole idea of Twitter.
That it would be public.
So that was very, very surprising to me. So that'll stay with me.
What surprised you students the most about us fogies? Fogies. Okay, veteran journalists.
Fair word.
Fogies knew what you meant.
The fogies knew what we meant, right. That's right. They knew. They knew. What else? What else? One more theme. Yes?
Whether you're a journalist or a private social media user, having a purpose for whatever you're doing or whatever you're posting.
What's my purpose? What's my purpose? You know, Jan, what did you hear today?
Well, aside from how much fun it was to hear someone learn about clickbait for the first time.
One of the most famous psychiatrists in the world learned about clickbait from us.
I know.
I could go home proud.
Me too. I learned that the stories of trauma can also be stories of compassion, but it depends on how we present them. You know, like Ginny, I teach ethics, so all my students out there have heard me say the harm and the help and the consequences and all those things. But this is what it means. This is how it plays out. It plays out in Joanna's story. It plays out when you're covering people whose identities have been stolen. It plays out when you go to the fire, the Yarnell fire. And so it's not just conceptual, it's very real, and that we have this incredible responsibility. So I guess that to me is, very helpful and a very big takeaway from a whole day of talking trauma.
Yeah. Let me leave you with one or two last thoughts. One of the things I took away from today was how hard the people who do this work well think about it. They think about it. It is I spent a lot of years in newsrooms, and I can hear myself saying things like, well, I'm doing this because it feels right in the pit of my stomach. It just feels right. And the older I get, the more I believe that's not good enough, okay? That relying on instinct is like just playing tennis with a hole in the racket, okay? Because instincts can fail us. They're great alarms. They're great alarm systems to kind of wake us up to the possibility we got to pay attention. But then forcing these thoughts up into our head, these feelings, where we can act upon them and think about them, seems to me to be an exercise worth getting really good at as early as you can. Think. Turn this work into an intellectual exercise. There's plenty of emotion in it, plenty of emotion. But when we do it, when we think about why we do the things we do and how we do them, then we can replicate the ones we do well. Okay, so thinking, it seems to me, is something worth going home and thinking about. The other thing I want to just leave you with, the thought is that I want to come back to this idea of journalistic purpose one last time and say that I believe that, especially if we're covering trauma, it's really important to know why we're doing it. Why do we do journalism? I couldn't make a stronger recommendation to say that whether you're out with a couple of friends for lunch or beers, or you're in a class sometime soon, take the time to talk about why you would want to do this work. Why does it matter? Why? Okay. I have, over the years, tried to collect some stories from people who think about that question. One of my friends back at the Enquirer was a woman named Ginny Smith. And one week in the late 90s, Ginny was asked to go do a story in northeastern Pennsylvania about a coal miner who wanted to build a Vietnam memorial, so to speak, a memorial, to the miners who had died doing their work. His grandfather had been a miner, his father had been a miner, his son was a miner. In fact, his parents ran a boarding home in which at night he'd fall asleep to the sound of miners and their black cough. And he wanted to raise $150,000 to build this monument. And so Ginny went up and did a story, pretty straightforward feature story about the miners and his effort. And it ran on the Sunday front in the feature section of the Enquirer. And she didn't hear anything for a couple of years. And one day an envelope arrives on Ginny's desk. And she opens the envelope and out spills a bunch of Polaroid pictures and a note. And it says, "Ginny, you should have been here. This was your day. Your story went out on the wires, and we raised $375,000, and we have our monument. It's been dedicated." So if you ask Ginny Smith why she does journalism, she would say that when we do it well, people do things they wouldn't otherwise do. They wouldn't even think to do. I have another friend who ran a paper out in the Midwest, and he called me one day and he says, "You'll never guess what happened to us today." So we had a story that it got great results. And I said, "What was it?" He said, "Well, it was a story that almost didn't make the paper, the front page of the paper. It was scheduled for way in the back. And I was walking through the newsroom, and he said, and they tell me they got this story that says the food bank is out of food." I said, "We got to put that story on page 1. They put it on page 1, and by 9 a.m. the next morning, the food bank was filled. One woman called and said, "Do you take meat?" And they said, "Yes, we have 2 freezers," and she filled the freezers all by herself. And so if you ask my friend Tim why he does journalism, he would say, some days we feed people. That's pretty cool. The last story I'll tell you is about a day on which I was in the presence of someone who had thought so hard about why he does journalism, why he did journalism, that he actually found physical strength in his answer. Back in the 90s, I was working for Knight Ridder, which owned a bunch of newspapers. It's part of journalism history now. And I was on a corporate task force, and I was in charge of communications. And so we had to somehow tell the 20,000 workers of Knight Ridder what this task force was all about. And I said, why don't we do a Q&A with the people who run the company, let them tell their story. And so I found the CEO, Jim Batten, and the president, Tony Ritter, and an executive vice president named Jack Fontaine. And they were in Boston at Harvard for a week at some symposium. And it was the only time I could get the 3 of them together. So I went up to Boston from my home in Philadelphia on a Monday afternoon, and I go to the hotel at 5 o'clock after their day is finished, and I knock on the door, and Jim Batten comes to the door. Now, Jim was a big man. He was about 6'5", and he was from the Tidewater area of Virginia, and he talked kind of slow. He was a former publisher and a former editor, and he was well-loved by his company. People respected him and liked him. And he said to me, "Butch, how you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing okay." And I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "Well, not real good." He said, "I got a splitting headache. It's been a long day. And I'm really kind of tired." And I said, "Well, Jim, we don't have to do this." He said, "Oh, no, you've come a long way. Come on in." So I go into, and let me set the scene for you. I walk into their suite, and there's a sofa, and Tony Ritter is sitting at one end of the sofa. And then there's a love seat, and Batten sits right here, so he's facing Tony, and I sit on the sofa across from Tony next to Jim, and Fontaine was in a chair. And I asked them questions about this task force and what they were doing, what the purpose of it was, a bunch of business questions. And then I got to the question I wanted to ask. Why do you guys do journalism? Now, at this point in the interview, Batten sitting in that love seat, is slumped down. And his voice on the tape is not very strong. He doesn't feel good. And to give you an idea of the quality of his answer to my question, I don't remember it. He just didn't feel good. So we hear from Tony, and we hear from Jack, and they gave businessman's answers to the question. They believed in the people of Knight Ridder and the future of the internet, et cetera, et cetera. And then I felt a tap on my leg. And it was Jim. He said, "Butch, I wonder if I could try that again." And I do remember what he said this time. He said, "In today's world, in the United States, the communities we serve and the country we serve face very daunting problems that must be solved if we're to continue to realize the promise of America for our children and our grandchildren. And I deeply believe that newspapers, well edited and well published, are wonderfully situated to be instruments of helping America find its way, solve its problems, and seize its opportunities. And that's an ennobling way to spend one's life." As he spoke, Jim's voice got stronger. I could see he was sitting up straight in the chair. The headache he complained of was a symptom of a brain tumor, and within a year he was dead. But I never forgot the day that I was in the presence of someone who felt so strongly about why he did what he did and had thought about it enough to be able to express it so beautifully, that he found physical strength. My wish for all of you is that as you pursue this difficult work, you do it with the passion of someone who believes in its usefulness, believes in why we do it. Because that can get you through the tough interviews, the tough days, the days when you don't get your questions answered. It can help you be all you can be as journalists. Know your purpose. Know why. Talk about it. Talk about the tough calls with your colleagues. And pick the routes that are going to help you maximize the good you can do for the community. Make a bunch of can't ever unsee moments for your readers and your viewers. And thank you very much for today. Thank you.
Butch, that was great. Thank you so much. For all of you, our day has ended. I would like to just acknowledge once again our incredible speakers and thank them for sharing with us all of their insight. I'd like to acknowledge Butch once again. Thank you so much for being here. All of our friends at Poynter who might be watching, we miss you. We'll see you next year, we hope. My colleagues, my students, all the volunteers, and all of you for being here have made it what I believe is a success. Please fill out those evaluation forms. Let me know what you want to see next year. And thank you so much again for being with us.